So these are the two main models that we're going to be using for the epidermis and the dermis. So the integumentary part of the exam is going to be focused mostly on these two models. We do have some smaller models over there. Probably use some of the straightforward structures with the smaller models because these tend to have more of the components to them. All right. So obviously the integumentary is broken up into the epidermis, which is in this model. You can actually detach this back if it wants to actually function with me. The epidermis, and obviously the dermis, and then you can see the hypodermis located here. On this model, this is actually a really good model for this because the epidermis is comprised of thick skin on one side and thin skin on the other. So with thick skin, you have stratum corneum, which is this sort of beige color here. Then you have stratum lucidum, which is that thin yellow layer there. All right. Then you have stratum granulosa, which is this sort of darker purple. Stratum spinosum, which is this thicker layer here, and then finally stratum basale. Whereas in the thin skin, we have stratum corneum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basale. Right, so you're missing that yellow layer on this end. So I can use this to either define thin skin or thick skin. All right. So we talked about the integumentary system being broken up into the epidermis and the dermis, same as we have here. We just went through the layers of the epidermis. So if we start focusing now on the dermis, there are a lot of different structures. We talked about the nervous component of this. There are free nerve endings that are located. On this model in particular, they're located right here. So you can see that this nerve comes up into sort of the epidermis, and there's nothing encapsulating it, so that would be a free nerve ending there. There is one on the side here, but obviously if I do this on an exam, I'm going to keep the focus on the front part of this model. You don't really see that in this model here, all right? But then we have the tactile corpuscle, which is located there, and located here kind of looks like a mitochondria. That's also what we call Meissner's corpuscle, all right? And then found deeper into the dermis down here and here, right? We have Pacinian corpuscle, right, which is more commonly referred to, but also known as the lamellar corpuscle. And lamellar because in Latin, lamellar means sort of flat sheets. So you can kind of see that looks, to me, looks like an onion cut in half, but basically a bunch of sheets just flattened together. All right. So from a nerve ending component, the only other thing is that each hair follicle has its own nerve ending sort of wrapped around it. All right. And these are called the hair follicle receptors. All right. On this model, you don't really see that, but you do see it on this model over here. So that kind of takes care of all the nervous tissue or the nerve components for the dermis and the epidermis. Once we get to the dermis, we're also looking at what we call the dermal papillae, which are located here. So the dermal papillae are the bumps that eject upward on the model, right? But as we learned in the lab, we also have these sort of dermal pegs or these dermal plugs that actually come down from the epidermis. So these are epidermal pegs, epidermal plugs. And both of those will sort of interlock together to give the dermis and the epidermis more security for attachment so that abrasions and things like that are lessened and you don't have as many blister buildup in that region. Okay. Now here you see the dermal papillae as well. They're not as pronounced as in this model because obviously this can move back, but you are able to identify both the dermal papillae and the epidermal plugs or pegs. All right. In the reticular layer, which is the main layer of the epidermis, and I would say the reticular layer would start from around this area down this way. This would be the papillary layer. All right, so up here, this would be the papillary layer, and then the rest would be the reticular layer. Most of the components that you need to identify are in the reticular layer. So each one of these indicates a hair follicle, and the hair follicle is the actual tube in which the hair is located. So each one of these has a hair follicle. Each hair follicle has associated with it a sebaceous gland located here, all right, and an erector pili muscle located here. On this model, the hair follicle has the sebaceous gland and the erector pili muscle associated with it. Okay. Now in this model, this actually shows you the cross section of the hair follicle as well. So as you guys learned in class, the hair itself, anything that's above the surface of the skin or anything that you can actually see is a hair shaft. So hair shaft. Right? Anything you can't see is a hair root, whether it's here or whether it's way down here. Right? So anything below the surface of the skin would be part of the hair root. Now the hair itself is broken up into 3 sort of tissue layers. On this model, I kind of like it because it's labeled A, B, C, D, E, F as you go out G. So A would be the innermost layer, all right? That would be the medulla, all right? B would be the cortex, and C would be the cuticle, all right? So in this model over here, you kind of lose some of that as you kind of go from this model outward, but it's labeled F, E, D, C, B, A on the outward part, and so it's kind of harder to tell here, but you can see that F, this green color, all right, that would be sort of your medulla, all right? Then you have the cuticle on this white part, and you don't really see the cortex because of the coloring that this has been used. So for that reason, I actually like this model a little bit better, all right? Within the follicle is then divided up into 4 tissues, all right? And again, you have from inner to outer, you have the inner sheath here. You have the outer sheath here. So the inner sheath would be D. The outer sheath would be E. F, which is this thin layer here, represents that glass membrane, which is a basement membrane. And then you have G, which is the epithelial connective tissue area. All right. These models, I should say, both indicate the eccrine gland, which is located here, and eccrine glands are sweat glands that have tubes or ducts, I should say, that are tubes that lead up to the surface so that sweat can be released. We also see the vascularization on both of these models, and then you have the vascular plexus here, this dermal vascular plexus that's located near the adipose tissue. You can see both of these models here, and that's important more for thermal regulation. All right. You do have the plexus that's located here in the dermis, or the dermal papillae as well. That's not that important necessarily because it doesn't sort of aid in thermal regulation. The more important one would be the thermal vascular plexus, which are located near the base of the reticular layer or in the hypodermis. All right. Other than that, I think we covered all the structures, so I think we're good.